I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. It was an April morning in Madrid, with that fresh air typical of the Castilian spring that makes you feel that anything is possible. My name is Carmen Ruiz Morales, and this is the story of how my life took an unexpected turn into what should have been the trip of my dreams. Miguel, my husband, and I had been planning this trip to Hawaii for months. We had been married for 5 years, living in our small but cozy apartment in the Chumberry neighborhood, and we had finally managed to save enough for this second honeymoon. As a high school teacher, I had been counting the days until the Easter holidays, imagining myself walking along those paradisiacal beaches that I had only seen in photographs. Every night after dinner, we would sit on the couch in our living room and spend hours watching travel guides and YouTube videos about the Hawaiian Islands. Miguel worked as an executive at a technology company, and although lately he spent more time with his mother, Mrs. Pilar, than with me, I attributed it to the stress of work and the recent widowhood of my mother-in-law. Planning the trip had become our common project. We carefully chose every detail: the resort in Maui, the restaurants we would visit, the excursions we would take. I even bought a new dress at El Corte Inglés, a beautiful white one that I imagined wearing during romantic dinners by the sea. Miguel smiled when he saw me try it on, although now that I think about it, his smile didn't reach his eyes. The day before the flight, I packed my bags with all the care in the world. I packed the sunscreen, the new swimsuits, the white dress, and that special lingerie set I had saved for the occasion. I remember calling my sister Anna to tell her how excited I was. "Enjoy every moment, little sister," he told me, "you deserve it after so much work." If only she knew what was to come. The morning of the flight, I woke up before my alarm went off. The taxi that would take us to the Adolfo Suarez Madrid Barajas Airport was scheduled for 6 in the morning. Miguel was unusually quiet during breakfast, but I was too excited to really notice. Even when we stopped by her mother's house to pick her up, supposedly to say goodbye, I didn't find it strange that she was fully dressed and had a suitcase by the door. The ride to the airport was tense, although at that moment I didn't know how to interpret it. Dona Pilar, sitting in the back seat of the taxi, couldn't stop talking about how much she would like to see Hawaii, while Miguel nodded absently. I looked out the window, watching the streets of Madrid go by, still asleep, dreaming of the beaches that awaited us. We arrived at Terminal 4 and followed the signs towards the check-in area. The airport was already full of early travelers, families with sleepy children, executives with their briefcases, young couples like us, or so I thought. Miguel insisted on checking in alone, while I stayed with Dona Pilar in the cafeteria. I ordered a café con leche and a croissant, my last Spanish breakfast before a week of Hawaiian food. It was when we were heading towards security that everything changed. Miguel stopped suddenly, right in front of the International Departures panel. He turned to me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, a mix of coldness and determination that made my blood run cold. "Carmen," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his own, "I have something to tell you." My heart started to beat faster, and I noticed how my hands were starting to sweat. "I've been thinking a lot about this trip, and I've made a decision." He looked at his mother, who was smiling with an expression of triumph that I will never forget. "Mom comes with me instead." The world stopped. The voices from the loudspeakers announcing flights, the noise of suitcases rolling on the floor, the conversations of other travelers, everything became a distant hum. I saw how Miguel took my plane ticket out of his pocket and gave it to his mother. "After all, she's my mother, right?" he continued, as if commenting on the weather. "And since Dad died, she's very lonely. She needs this vacation more than you do." Then, as if to finish the job, he added, "Don't worry, I'll find another wife, one who understands the importance of family." I stood there, with my pink suitcase, a gift from Miguel last year, next to me, watching my husband and mother-in-law walk away towards the security checkpoint. Dona Pilar didn't even look back, but I could see her holding onto her son's arm with a victorious air. Travelers passed around me, some casting me curious glances as they saw me motionless in the middle of the hallway. A ground stewardess came up to me to ask if I was okay. I must have looked like a ghost, standing in the middle of the airport, silent tears streaming down my cheeks. I don't know how long I was like this, but finally my legs responded. Like an automaton, I headed towards the airport exit. The same taxi that had brought us was still there, the driver cleaning the windows. Seeing me alone, he asked me if there was a problem. I couldn't answer. I just climbed into the back seat and gave him my address between sobs. During the return trip, Madrid seemed like another city. The streets that had once seemed full of promise now looked gray and hostile. We passed by the bakery where we had bought our wedding cake, next to the park where Miguel proposed to me, near the institute where he taught. Each place was a stinging reminder of the life that had just been shattered. When I got home, I sat on the couch where we had planned our trip so many times. The laptop was still open on the living room table, showing photos of the resort in Maui where my husband and mother-in-law would now be staying. In the kitchen, Miguel's cup of coffee was still in the sink, as if nothing had changed, as if at any moment he would return from work. But everything had changed. And as I looked out the window at the Madrid sky, with its spring clouds floating lazily, something inside me also began to change. The humiliation and pain were still there, but something else was beginning to emerge, a spark of rage, of determination, of wounded dignity that refused to be trampled. I took my phone and blocked Miguel's number. Then I opened WhatsApp and left all the family groups I shared with my husband's family. One by one, I deleted the plans we had made together. I canceled the birthday dinner I had been organizing. I deleted the reminders of our anniversary. I deleted the photos from our last trip to Valencia. That night, sitting on our bed, now just mine, I looked at our wedding photos. We were so young, so naive. Miguel was smiling at the camera in that gray suit that he liked so much, and I was shining in my white dress, holding a bouquet of red roses. How had we gotten to this? At what point did I let Dona Pilar get so involved in our lives? I remembered all the times Miguel had cancelled our plans to take care of his mother, the dinners interrupted by her calls, the vacations modified to include her. It had been so gradual that I barely noticed it, like a drop of water that little by little erodes a rock until it creates a canyon. As the sun set over Madrid, turning the sky orange and pink, I made a decision. This would not be the end of my story, but the beginning. Miguel and his mother thought I would stay home, crying and lamenting. They had no idea how wrong they were. I opened my computer and started researching. First, I looked for a good divorce lawyer. Next, I reviewed our joint accounts and collected all important documents. Finally, I did something that would surprise everyone. I booked my own ticket to Hawaii. Night fell on Madrid, and with it, my last tears. Tomorrow would be another day, and I would be another Carmen. One who would not allow anyone, not even the man who had sworn to love her, to treat her like something disposable. The trip of my dreams had turned into a nightmare, but I would transform it into something more, my declaration of independence. The taxi dropped me off in front of our building in Chimberry, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I was a stranger in my own home. The doorman, Don Manuel, looked at me with concern as he dragged my pink suitcase through the lobby. "Mrs. Carmen. Is everything okay? I thought you would be heading to Hawaii at this time." I couldn't answer. The words stuck in my throat like stones. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, my legs shaking so much I could barely stand. When I finally managed to open the door of the house, the silence hit me like a slap in the face. Everything was exactly as we had left it that morning, Miguel's cup of coffee in the sink, the newspaper folded on the dining room table, the Hawaii travel guide scattered across the couch. But something had fundamentally changed. This was no longer our home. It was the scene of a betrayal that I could not have imagined in my worst nightmares. I plopped down on the couch, still dressed in the clothes I had carefully chosen for the trip, comfortable beige pants and a light blue blouse that Miguel had given me for Christmas. The thought that I had chosen my clothes to please him sent a new wave of nausea through me. The phone started ringing almost immediately. It was my sister Anna. Of course, the taxi that had taken us to the airport was from her company, and the driver must have told her what had happened. I let it ring. Then Lucia, my best friend since high school, called. Then Maria, my roommate at the institute where I taught. I ignored all the calls. He didn't have the strength to explain the inexplicable. The hours passed as if they were days. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the unlit television, while the daylight slowly changed. The morning's sun gave way to the more intense light of midday, and then to the golden tones of the Madrid afternoon. I didn't eat, I didn't drink, I barely moved. At some point, the doorbell rang. It was Anna, worried about my silence. I let her in because I knew that if I didn't, I would be able to call the fire department. My older sister had always been like that, protective to the extreme. For God's sake, Carmen. What happened? He exclaimed as soon as he saw me. I guess she must have looked terrible, with her makeup smudged and her clothes rumpled. I told him everything between sobs, the airport, Miguel's words, Dona Pilar's triumphant smile. Anna listened to me in silence, her dark eyes becoming more and more indignant. When I finished, he got up and started moving around the apartment like a tornado, opening closets and taking things out. First, you're going to take a shower, he declared in that tone that brooked no argument. Next, we're going to order food from the Argentinian restaurant on the corner, because you need to eat something. And then, we're going to call Dad. Our father, Antonio Ruiz, was a lawyer. Not one of the most prestigious in Madrid, but one respected in the Chamberí neighborhood, where he had practiced for 30 years. This isn't going to stay like this, Anna insisted as she pushed me towards the bathroom. The hot water from the shower helped clear my mind a little, but it also unleashed a new torrent of tears. Every object in the bathroom reminded me of Miguel, his shampoo, his toothbrush, the cologne I had given him for his birthday. When I came out, wrapped in my white bathrobe, Anna had already ordered the food and had called Dad. He's coming here, he announced while drying my hair with a towel. And Lucia is coming too. You can't be alone right now. The food came first, meat empanadas and salad. I wasn't hungry, but Anna forced me to eat at least one empanada. You need strength, he insisted. Revenge is a dish that is served cold, but it requires energy. Lucia arrived when I had barely finished eating. She stormed into the apartment, her heels clicking on the parquet, her black hair loose and wild as always. He sat next to me on the couch and hugged me without saying a word. We didn't need words, 20 years of friendship had taught us to communicate in silence. My father arrived shortly after, with his worn leather briefcase and his worried expression. At 65 years old, he was still the wisest man he knew. He sat in his favorite chair, the one he always occupied when he came to visit us, and looked at me with his tired but determined eyes. Tell me everything again, honey, he asked as he took out his notebook. And don't leave out any details. I told the story again, this time more coherently. My father took notes, nodding occasionally, his brow furrowing deeper and deeper. When I finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me intently. What Miguel has done, he said in his lawyer's voice, is not just emotional cruelty. There are also legal implications. The tickets were purchased with joint money, the trip was planned as a marital activity, and he unilaterally excluded you. And transferred your ticket to a third party without your consent. Lucia, who worked at a bank, nodded vigorously. And credit cards, he added. Are they joint? Yes, I replied, suddenly remembering. We have a common account where his salary and mine go, and the cards are linked to that account. My father smiled for the first time all afternoon. Good. That gives us some wiggle room. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. My father made calls, Lucia reviewed account statements, Anna organized the apartment, removing photos of Miguel and putting his personal belongings in boxes. I watched everything as if I were watching a movie, feeling strangely disconnected from reality. That night, when everyone left, after Anna insisted on staying the night and I insisted that she needed to be alone, I sat on the terrace with a glass of red wine. From there I could see the lights of Madrid, the city that never slept, that continued its life as if my world had not collapsed. The phone vibrated. It was a message from Miguel. We just landed in Los Angeles for the layover. Mom is so excited. I hope you understand that this is what's best for everyone. The rage he had been holding back all day suddenly exploded. I threw the phone against the couch and screamed. I screamed until my throat hurt, until the neighbors banged on the ceiling for silence, until tears choked me. The next few days were a blur of legal paperwork and phone calls. My father filed a divorce suit for cruel treatment and abandonment. Lucia helped me open a separate bank account and transfer my share of the savings. Anna took it upon herself to spread the word in the neighborhood, making sure everyone knew the truth about the model's son, Miguel, and his poor widowed mother. The nights were the worst. I would wake up with a start, seeking Miguel's familiar warmth in bed, only to remember that I was alone. I saw the photos they published on Instagram, Miguel and Dona Pilar on the beach, in luxurious restaurants, on excursions around the island. Each image was like a dagger to the heart. But something began to change. Maybe it was the unconditional support of my family and friends. Maybe it was the indignation of my students when they found out why their favorite teacher had missed a few days of class. Or maybe it was simply that the pain began to transform into something else, determination. One morning, while drinking coffee on the deck, a new routine I had developed, I realized that I was no longer crying when I saw the photos from Hawaii. Instead, he felt a kind of cold clarity. Miguel and his mother thought they had destroyed me, that I would stay in Madrid licking my wounds while they enjoyed paradise. They were very wrong. I entered the apartment and turned on my computer. It was time to plan my next move. Miguel had always underestimated my intelligence, my resistance, my ability to recover. He thought she was just a simple, conformist high school teacher, happy to live in her and her mother's shadow. But I was much more than that. She was the daughter of a lawyer who had taught me to fight for my rights. She was the sister of a woman who never gave up. She was best friends with someone who knew all the tricks of the banking system. And, above all, she was a woman who had just discovered her own strength. As I typed away at the computer, researching flights and hotels, I felt a smile forming on my lips. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was determined. Did Miguel want to play dirty? Well, I could play that game too. The shy and complacent high school teacher had died in that airport. In her place, someone new was being born, someone who wouldn't allow anyone else to treat her like an expendable person. The bottom of the well turned out to be a good place to gain momentum. The morning that changed everything started like any other in my new routine. I woke up early, made coffee in the Italian coffee maker that I had bought to replace the capsule machine that Miguel had taken with him on one of his furtive visits to the apartment, and went out to the terrace. The sky over Madrid showed that intense blue so characteristic of the Castilian plateau, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe without my chest hurting. Lucia had called me the night before with interesting news. As an executive at Banco Santander, she had been investigating the movements of joint credit cards. Carmen, he had told me with that tone he used when he discovered something juicy, you won't believe what they're spending in Hawaii. As I sipped my coffee, I checked the email he had sent me. The numbers were astronomical: dinners at luxury restaurants, private excursions, spa treatments. All paid for with our joint cards. Miguel had always been careful with money, almost stingy, but it seemed that with his mother he did not skimp on expenses. That's when I made the decision. It would not be a decision born of revenge, although I admit that there was a certain pleasure in poetic justice. No, this would be a decision of self-love, of recovered dignity. "Good morning, Dad," I said when he answered the phone. "I need your legal help for something important." My father, who was already in his office on Princessa Street, he was always an early riser, listened to my plan carefully. "It's risky," he warned, "but legal. And more importantly, it's fair." The next morning found me at my father's law office, surrounded by legal documents and account statements. Yolanda, his secretary for decades, brought me a coffee with milk and some pastries, looking at me with that mixture of compassion and admiration that I had begun to notice in the eyes of everyone who knew my story. "Look," my father explained, pointing to several documents, "since the trip was paid for with joint funds and the tickets were in both of our names, you have a legal right to your share. The fact that Miguel transferred your ticket to his mother without your consent could even be considered a form of misappropriation." While we were reviewing the papers, Anna appeared in the office. My sister had been extraordinarily busy lately, pulling strings and contacts I didn't even know I had. "I have something that will interest you," he announced, waving his iPad. "Do you remember Jorge, my friend who works at the travel agency?" Of course he remembered. Jorge had been Anna's boyfriend during college, and although their romantic relationship had not worked out, they remained good friends. "He found a package similar to the one you and Miguel booked, but better," Anna continued with a mischievous smile. "And guess what, it's at the same resort." My heart skipped a beat. Was I really considering this? Fly to Hawaii, to the same place where Miguel and his mother were enjoying a vacation that should have been mine? "You wouldn't go alone," Anna added, as if she could read my thoughts. "Lucia has already asked for her vacation at the bank. She says that after the last crazy year she's had, she deserves a break." The idea began to take shape in my mind. It wouldn't be an act of revenge, I told myself. It would be an act of reclamation, of my dignity, of my dreams, of my right to be happy. "There's more," my father interjected, adjusting his glasses. "I've been in contact with a colleague in Honolulu. The jurisdiction is complicated, but we can take legal steps to protect your financial interests while you are there." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Jorge got us tickets with a stopover in Los Angeles, different from the route that Miguel and his mother had taken. Lucia arrived during her lunch break, bringing with her bank documents that would need my signature. "We can freeze the joint cards at any time," he explained while nibbling on a ham sandwich. "We just need the right time." That afternoon when I returned home, the apartment felt different. It was no longer the place where my marriage had died, but the starting point of my new life. I started packing my suitcase in a completely different spirit than a few weeks ago. This time, every item of clothing I chose was for me, not to please anyone else. The white dress she had bought for the romantic dinners with Miguel stayed in the closet. Instead, I packed colorful, comfortable clothes, swimsuits that made me feel confident, dresses that reflected who I was, not who others wanted me to be. Lucia arrived that night with a bottle of red wine and plans. "I've been researching the resort," he said as he opened the bottle. "They have an incredible activity program: surf lessons, helicopter excursions, snorkeling with turtles." "Isn't it too expensive?" I asked, thinking about my post-separation finances. Lucia smiled mischievously. "Let's say that Miguel and Dona Pilar have been quite generous with the joint card. I think it's fair that you enjoy your share of those expenses." The week before the trip flew by. Between classes at the institute, where my students noticed a change in me, a new energy that they couldn't explain, the meetings with my father to finalize the legal details, and the preparations for the trip, I barely had time to think about Miguel. The night before leaving, Anna insisted on organizing a small dinner at her house. My parents, Lucia, and some close friends from high school came. My mother, who had been unusually quiet since she found out what had happened, took me aside at one point in the night. "You know something, daughter?" he said, holding my hand in his. "When I married your father, my mother told me something I never forgot: self-love is the only thing that never betrays you. It took me years to really understand what it meant. You learned it faster than I did." His words stayed with me during the trip to the airport the next morning. This time, the journey was completely different. Lucia was next to me, making plans and laughing, while Anna took us in her car, the radio playing summer songs. At the airport, my father suddenly appeared, even though we had told him that it was not necessary for him to come so early. "I have something for you," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside were legal documents, but also a handwritten note: "Justice doesn't always come the way we expect. Sometimes, it comes with the sound of waves and the taste of freedom. I love you, Dad." The flight was long, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid when taking off. Lucia fell asleep almost immediately, but I stayed awake, watching Madrid become smaller and smaller beneath us. I felt like I was leaving behind not just a city, but a version of myself. During the layover in Los Angeles, while we were having coffee at the airport, Lucia showed me the latest photos that Miguel had posted on Instagram. Him and his mother posing on the beach, dining at expensive restaurants, living the life they had stolen. But for the first time, I didn't feel pain when I saw them. Instead, I felt a strange calm, almost amusement. "Do you know what's the funniest thing?" I said to Lucia as we waited for our flight to Honolulu. "They think they have taken something from me, but in reality they have given me something much more valuable: the freedom to be who I really am." The final flight to Hawaii was like a dream. As we approached the islands, the Pacific spread out beneath us like an infinite blue blanket. The clouds dispersed to reveal the green mountains and white sand beaches I had seen so many times in photos. When we landed in Honolulu, the warm, scented air enveloped us like a hug. A driver was waiting for us with a sign that said, "Miss Ruiz and Companion," a detail that Jorge had arranged as a surprise. During the drive to the resort, Lucia and I kept the windows down, letting the tropical breeze play with our hair. The palm trees swayed gently, the ocean sparkled in the evening sun, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to truly smile. "Are you ready?" Lucia asked when the car stopped in front of the resort. I looked at the white building in front of us, the infinity pools, the hammocks under the palm trees. Somewhere in this paradise, Miguel and his mother were living their version of the Hawaiian dream. But I was about to live mine. "More than ever," I replied, and it was true. This was not the trip I had planned. It was better. Because this time, it wasn't a trip to please others or to keep up appearances. It was a journey to find myself, to rediscover who I was when I wasn't trying to be the perfect wife or the complacent daughter-in-law. The turn my life had taken was not what I expected, but as I walked towards the hotel reception, with Lucia at my side and the Hawaiian sun above us, I knew it was exactly the turn I needed. The first morning in Hawaii, I woke up before dawn, disoriented by the time change and the unfamiliar softness of the hotel sheets. I crept quietly to the balcony of our room, trying not to wake Lucia, who was sleeping soundly in the other bed. The air was different here, sweet and salty at the same time, loaded with promise and possibility. From our 15th floor balcony, I could see the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon, its waters still dark under the pre-dawn sky. The palm trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, and in the distance, I could hear the gentle sound of the waves. As I waited for the sun to emerge over the horizon, I mentally reviewed our plan. I knew from posts on social media that Miguel and Dona Pilar had breakfast every day at the resort's main restaurant, the Royal Palm, between 8 and 9 in the morning. I also knew, thanks to Lucia's discreet research, that they had reservations for several exclusive activities during the week. "Good morning, early bird," Lucia's sleepy voice brought me out of my thoughts. She joined me on the balcony, wrapped in the hotel bathrobe. Ready to start? I nodded, without taking my eyes off the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise, turning the sky pink and orange. You know, for the first time in weeks, I feel completely awake. We prepare calmly, carefully choosing our clothes. I wore a turquoise sundress that I had bought specifically for this trip, a color that Miguel had always considered too bright for me. Lucia opted for a white beach outfit that highlighted her natural tan. At 8:15, we headed to the restaurant. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear I felt. It was anticipation. We chose a strategically placed table, with a perfect view of the entrance but partially hidden by a decorative palm tree. We didn't have to wait long. At 8:30 sharp, Miguel and Dona Pilar made their entrance. He was wearing one of his favorite brand-name polo shirts, and she was wearing a flowery dress that she had probably bought with my money. They went to their usual table, next to the windows that overlooked the pool. "Breathe," Lucia whispered, noticing how my hands tightened around the coffee cup. I watched them while they ate breakfast, oblivious to our presence. Miguel maintained his morning ritual, first coffee, then eggs Benedict, finally a piece of fruit. Dona Pilar, for her part, complained to the waiter about the temperature of the tea, as she had done every morning according to the comments she had read on social networks. That's when I put the first part of the plan into action. I pulled out my phone and, with surprisingly steady hands, sent a message to the Honolulu lawyer my father had contacted. It was the sign we were waiting for. Meanwhile, Lucia did her part. As a banking executive, I had prepared everything for this moment. With a simple text message, he activated the protocol we had planned. The effect was almost immediate, although Miguel and Dona Pilar still did not know it. All joint credit cards had just been blocked. "More coffee?" the waiter asked, approaching our table. "Yes, please," I responded in English, aware that my voice could carry all the way to Miguel's table. I saw how his back tightened slightly, how he turned his head looking for the origin of that family voice. Our eyes were found for the first time since that day at the Madrid airport. I saw how the color left his face, how his eyes opened with a mixture of surprise and fear. Dona Pilar, noticing her reaction, turned too. The moment was electric. I kept serene, holding her gaze as I brought the coffee cup to my lips. Lucia, next to me, smiled sweetly and greeted her hand. "Carmen," Miguel's voice sounded weak, almost strangled. He got up from his table, but before he could take a step towards us, his phone rang. It was the bank. What followed was like a perfectly choreographed play. I saw how Miguel listened to the phone, how his face went from confusion to panic. Dona Pilar, intuiting that something was going wrong, began to ask questions aloud, attracting the attention of other diners. "What do you mean that the cards are blocked?" Miguel's voice rose above the restaurant's murmur. "There must be a mistake." But there was no mistake. All joint cards had been blocked by suspicious activity. The bank would need the authorization of both headlines to reactivate them. And I, of course, were in a hurry to give that authorization. I rose slowly from my table, smoothing my turquoise dress. "Good morning, Miguel," I said with a calm that I didn't know. "What a surprise to find you here." Dona Pilar stood up, her red face of indignation. "What have you done?" "Me?" I replied with pretended innocence. "I'm just enjoying a vacation with my best friend. After all, I also had a ticket for this trip, right?" The scene that followed was worthy of a soap opera. Dona Pilar began shouting in Spanish, forgetting that we were in an international restaurant. Miguel tried to calm her down while trying to contact the bank in Madrid, without success due to the time difference. Lucia and I retired discreetly from the restaurant, leaving after us the chaos we had created. In the hotel lobby, we met the manager, who had previously been informed of the legal situation by Honolulu's lawyer. The rest of the day was a symphony of poetic justice. While Miguel and Dona Pilar dealt with blocked cards and cancelled reserves, Lucia and I enjoyed each activity they had planned. The helicopter tour on the island was especially memorable, not only because of spectacular views, but because they knew they had had to cancel their reserve. In the afternoon, while we took cocktails by the pool, we could see Miguel discussing heatedly by phone in a garden corner. Dona Pilar had disappeared in her room, presumably to avoid the shame of being seen in this situation. "Do you think we have passed?" Lucia asked as he sipped his pineapple. I thought about the humiliation I had felt at the Madrid airport, the tears that I had shed, in the way they had taken for granted that they could have my life as if I did not matter. "No," I replied sincerity. "I think it's exactly what they deserved." That night, we had dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in the resort, the Ocean View. From our table on the terrace, we could see all the bay illuminated by the moon. Miguel and Mrs. Pilar, on the other hand, had to settle for the hotel buffet, the only service included in their basic package. "For justice," Lucia gave, raising his glass of white wine. "For dignity," I added, dyeing our glasses. The following days were a delicate dance of casual encounters and subtle revenge. Every time we crossed them at the resort, we maintained an exquisite courtesy that did the situation even more unbearable for them. Miguel tried to talk to me several times, but he always found a way to sneak elegantly. One afternoon, while we snorkel in the bay, watching sea turtles swim quietly around us, I realized something important: the best revenge was not to hurt them, but to be happy despite them. The news that they would have to shorten their trip due to financial problems came to the 5th day. I saw them do the checkout from the pool bar, Mrs. Pilar complaining out loud about the injustice of everything, Miguel dragging his bags with fallen shoulders. "Satisfied?" Lucia asked as we saw them climb to the taxi that would take them to the airport. Strangely, yes, I replied. But not for the reasons I expected. And it was true. The satisfaction did not come from having ruined the trip, although I admit that that had been gratifying. I came from having shown myself that I could face them, that I could be in the same space without collapsing, that it could be stronger than I never imagined. That night, sitting on the beach watching sunset, I wrote a message to my father: "Thank you for teaching me that justice can be sweet." His answer came almost immediately: "True victory is not revenge, but the freedom that comes next." The remaining days of our vacations were different. Without Miguel and Mrs. Pilar at the resort, I could relax completely for the first time. We explored the island, we met new people, we laughed until our stomach hurt. One morning, while swimming in the ocean, I realized that I no longer thought of them. The waves rocked me gently, the sun warmed my skin, and my mind was at peace. Revenge had been satisfactory, yes, but true victory was this: the ability to be happy for myself. Lucia was right. The best revenge was not to destroy them, but rebuild myself, stronger and freer than ever. The satisfaction of seeing Miguel and Dona Pilar left the resort ahead of time was only the beginning of what he would call Justice Week. While Lucia and I enjoyed our breakfast on the hotel terrace the next morning at your game, my phone kept vibrating with notifications. The first to contact me was my father. "The bank has confirmed everything," said his message. "The cards will remain blocked until you return to Madrid. They have tried to activate them from 3 different branches in Honolulu, without success." Lucia, who was checking her own phone as she nibbled an avocado toast, released a giggle. "Do you know what is the best? As a bank executive, I can see all rejected transaction attempts. They have tried to pay even in an airport souvenir shop." The coffee had never known as sweet as that morning. The Hawaiian sun shone on the ocean, creating diamond flashes in the water, and for the first time, I felt that the universe was on my side. "But this is not all," Lucia continued, leaning forward with that expression he put when he was about to reveal something juicy. "Do you remember that I told you that I had been investigating bank movements?" I nodded, remembering the long hours that my friend had spent reviewing account states and transactions. Well, it turns out that your dear husband has been doing quite some financial movements, interesting in recent months. Transfers to an account that, casually, is in the name of his mother. My heart skipped a beat. What kind of transfers? The type that judges consider very interesting in cases of divorce, Lucia replied with a satisfied smile. I have prepared a detailed report for your father. Miguel has been transferring small quantities regularly, probably thinking that we would not notice. But when you add everything... How much? I asked, although I wasn't sure to want to know the answer. Enough for the judge to consider that there has been concealment of property, Lucia replied. And the best thing is that everything is perfectly documented. While assimilating this information, my phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Ana. You will not believe what is happening in Madrid. History has leaked in the neighborhood. Mrs. Concha's hairdresser is a hotbed of gossip. Mrs. Concha, owner of the most popular Chamberí hairdresser, was the epicenter of the neighborhood gossip. If the story had reached his ears, soon all Madrid would know. Miguel was always so concerned about his reputation, I murmured, remembering how he insisted on maintaining a perfect image before the neighbors and their co-workers. Well, now he has something to really worry about, Lucia replied, using more coffee. Ana says that the version that circulates is quite colorful. The following days were a feast of justice served in small doses. Every few hours we received Madrid updates. Miguel had tried to access the bank account without success. Dona Pilar had been seen arguing with the staff of a bank branch. The neighbors commented on the situation in the neighborhood market. Meanwhile, Lucia and I dedicated ourselves to enjoying Hawaii as never before. We reserve all the activities that Miguel and his mother had to cancel: diving between coral reef, surf classes, massages in the spa, dinner in exclusive restaurants. Do you know what is the most ironic? Lucia said one afternoon while we took the sun on the beach. You are probably enjoying this trip much more than you would have done with him. He was right. With Miguel, each activity would have been carefully planned, each meticulously calculated expense, every moment supervised by Mrs. Pilar's critical look. Now, on the other hand, he was free to do what he wanted, when he wanted. In the middle of the week, I received a call from my father. There were news on the legal front. The judge has seen transfers evidence, he explained. He has issued a preventive embargo on your mother-in-law's accounts. Apparently, Miguel did not take it very well. What did he do? I asked, sitting on the balcony of our room, watching the tropical sunset. Let's say his behavior in the court has not done any favor, my father replied with a note of satisfaction in his voice. He started shouting about personal conspiracies and revenge. The judge was not very impressed. That night, during dinner, Lucia proposed a special toast. For the men who underestimate their wives, he said, raising his glass of white wine. And for women who show them their mistake, I added, dyeing our glasses. The final blow, however, came unexpectedly. One morning, while we had breakfast on the terrace, I received an email from the company's human resources department where Miguel worked. Apparently, someone, and had a good idea who, had leaked information about their recent behavior. The company has a very strict policy about the personal behavior of its executives, Lucia explained while reading the mail over my shoulder. Something about, maintain the highest ethical standards and, protect the company's reputation. Miguel had been called to a disciplinary meeting. His behavior, especially the incident in the court, had reached the ears of the board of directors. His future in the company was, at least, committed. Do you think he deserves it? I asked Lucia, feeling a stab of doubt. Do you mean the man who abandoned you at an airport, took his mother in your place, spent your common money without consideration, and then tried to hide active during divorce? Lucia replied, arquing an eyebrow. Yes, I think he deserves it. The last days in Hawaii were a sweet epilogue of our revenge. Every morning he brought new news from Madrid. The scandal grew, Miguel's reputation deteriorated, and Dona Pilar had been seen moving from his luxury floor to a more modest apartment. "It's like seeing a domino game," Lucia said as we set up the last day. One piece falls, and then another, and another. The night before our return flight, we decided to take a last walk along the beach. The full moon shone on the ocean, creating a silver path on the waves. I stopped for a moment, letting warm water stroke my feet. "Do you know what is most surprising?" I told Lucia. "I don't feel any satisfaction in your suffering. Only peace." "That, dear," my friend replied, passing her arm on my shoulders, "it is because you really won. Not only the battle, but the inner war." The return flight to Madrid was calm. I slept most of the time, lulled by the soft buzz of the plane's engines. In my dreams, Miguel no longer appeared. Instead, he dreamed with new beginnings, with infinite possibilities. When we landed in Barajas, the circle had closed. The same airport that had witnessed my humiliation now received me as a different woman, stronger, wiser, freer. Ana was waiting for us at the terminal with an enigmatic smile. "I have news," he said while we were going to parking. "Miguel has been degraded in his work. Apparently, the board of directors does not appreciate executives who appear in the newspapers for the wrong reasons." "And Dona Pilar?" I asked, more out of curiosity than for real interest. "Oh, she is busy moving to a smaller floor. It turns out that when her son's transfers stopped, she could not keep her lifestyle. The final blow had not been any of our calculated actions. It had been the simple act of recovering my power, of demonstrating that it was not the victim that they thought it was." That night, in my newly redecorated apartment, I had taken advantage of my absence for Ana to supervise some changes. I opened a bottle of wine that had brought Hawaii. While watching the lights in Madrid from my terrace, I thought about everything that had happened. Miguel and Mrs. Pilar had tried to destroy me, but instead they had made me stronger. They had tried to humiliate me, but they had given me the impulse to find my true value. They had tried to take a trip, but they had given me something much more valuable, my freedom. The final blow had not been an act of revenge, but of poetic justice. And the best part was that my new life was just beginning. The return to the routine in Madrid was different from everything he had imagined. The first day I returned to the institute where I taught, I felt all eyes on me. They were not gathering, as he had feared, but of badly concealed admiration. The story of my revenge in Hawaii had spread as a gunpowder watering throughout Chumberry, and apparently, I had become a kind of local heroine. "Miss Carmen!" Maria exclaimed, one of my high school students, running towards me in the hall. "What a beautiful brunette brings from Hawaii." His eyes shone with a mixture of curiosity and admiration that made me smile. The teacher's room was also a hotbed of silent support. My colleagues, who had witnessed my marriage to Miguel for years, received me with complicit hugs and smiles. Pilar, the math teacher who had been in the center for 30 years, took me apart during the break. "Dear," he told me with a smile that wrinkled his entire face, "you've done what many of us have only dreamed. You are an example for all." The days became weeks, and little by little I was establishing a new normality. The mornings no longer started with the breakfast ritual shared with Miguel, but with yoga on the terrace, something he had always wanted to do but that he considered a waste of time. On weekends they were no longer dominated by mandatory visits to Dona Pilar, but were mine to do what I wanted. One afternoon, while corrected exams in my new office at home, I had converted Miguel's former office into my workspace. I received a call from my father. "The judge has issued a sentence," he announced without preamble. "Transfers to your mother, in law account, have been considered concealment of goods. They will have to return everything, with interest." The news caused me less satisfaction than I had expected a few months ago. "Do you know, Dad? I don't care so much. I know, honey, he replied with a soft voice. That is precisely the reason you have really won. The real test arrived a week later, when Miguel appeared at the door of the house. He had lost weight, and his usual superiority air had been replaced by an expression of defeat. He wore a suit that I recognized as one of the cheapest in his closet, a detail that would have gone unnoticed months ago. Carmen, he said, his voice a broken whisper, I have made the greatest mistake of my life. I stayed on the threshold, watching him. The man who once seemed to me the center of my universe now looked small, almost insignificant. Do you know what is the saddest, Miguel? I replied calmly. It was not even your biggest mistake. Your biggest mistake was to think that you could treat me as something discharge. That you could decide on my life as if I were a piece in your game. I know, he tried to step forward, but my firm posture stopped him. I have been an idiot. The company has degraded me, Mom doesn't speak to me since he had to move to a smaller floor, and I can only think of you. No, I interrupted it, raising a hand. You can't think of me. You think about the image you had of me, the complacent wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, the woman who endured everything to maintain peace. But that woman no longer exists. Carmen, please, his voice broke. Give me another chance. We can start over, we can. Do you know what is the most ironic? I interrupted it again. That you were right in one thing. That day at the airport you said you would find another wife. And you were right, because I am no longer the same person. I am better. I saw how tears began to form in their eyes, but I no longer felt anything. Neither grief, no anger, not even satisfaction. Only a deep sense of peace. Goodbye, Miguel, I said, and closed the door gently. That night, I organized a dinner at home. I invited Ana, Lucia, my parents, and some friends from the institute. While preparing the paella, another thing that Miguel never let me cook because I was too smelling, I thought about how much my life had changed in recent months. For the new Carmen, Ana gave when we were all sitting around the table. For the Carmen who was always there, but some did not know how to see, my father corrected, raising his cup. The following days brought more changes. I enrolled in a photography course, something I had always wanted to do. I started going out more with my co-workers, discovering that we had much more in common than I had thought. I even bought a small motorcycle, a scooter to move through Madrid with more freedom. One morning, while drinking coffee on my favorite terrace in the neighborhood, I saw Mrs. Pilar on the other side of the street. He was leaving a second-hand store, loading plastic bags. Our looks crossed for a moment, and I saw in their eyes a flash of recognition followed by shame. I looks away, not for fear or resentment, but because I really didn't care. Life continued its course. The divorce was ended without major complications, thanks in large part to the meticulous documentation that Lucia had prepared on bank transfers. Miguel tried to contact me a couple more times, but my answers were increasingly short until he finally stopped trying. In the institute, my classes began to change. I started incorporating more discussions about empowerment and self-esteem, especially with my teenage students. Without referring direct to my own experience, I shared messages about the importance of maintaining one's identity and not allowing others to define your value. Miss Carmen, a student told me one day after class, you seem different this year. More happy. Do you know what, Laura? I replied, smiling. It's because I'm finally myself. The true moment of triumph, however, came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while walking through the retirement with Lucia, we found an old common friend, someone who had taken sides for Miguel during the separation. Carmen, what a surprise! He exclaimed with false joy. I have heard that Miguel is dating someone new. I thought you would want to know. A few months ago, that information would have destroyed me. But at that time, I could only smile. I'm glad for him, I replied sincerely. I hope you have learned to be a better person. The expression of bewilderment on his face was unpayable. I expected tears, drama, anything but his quiet indifference. That night, while I was having dinner on my terrace under the stars of Madrid, I reflected on everything that had happened. The trip to Hawaii, which should have been a second honeymoon, had become the catalyst in my transformation. Miguel's betrayal and his mother, who should have destroyed me, had become stronger. My phone vibrated with an Ana message. Guess what? Jorge has found offers for a trip to Greece. Do you sign up? I smiled as I typed my answer. Do you know what? This time, I feel like going alone. Because that was the true victory, not needing anyone else to be happy. Do not need revenge or justice, not even the approval of others. Just need myself. The sun was put on Madrid, staining the sky of pink and orange. From my terrace I could see the life of the city develop, couples walking, children playing, elderly talking in the banks. All that life that had always been there, but only now I could fully appreciate. My father was right, true victory was not revenge, but the freedom that comes later. And I, Carmen Ruiz Morales, was finally free.